Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to our After Dinner Mint series titled Behind the Code. On the show, we welcome Art Blocks artists to share a deeper look into their project's creative coding and process. Today, we welcome Maya Mann, who joins us to speak about her project, Fake It Till You Make It. Welcome, Maya.
Hi, thanks for having me. Happy Valentine's Day.
True, true. I'll
Oh,
let you get started.
yeah. All right, cool. I'm very excited to talk about the process behind Fake It Till You Make It today, because there are so many details that went into making the project that I think kind of aren't obvious or get lost when people are just seeing the output. So I'm gonna focus on the code, but also weave in some other elements of my process talking about it today. So, if you're not familiar, this is the collection on Art Blocks. It's called Fake It Till You Make It. It was released last August, and it is programmed using P5.js, and it's a lot of JavaScript. But for background, the project started because I became really obsessed with um, this certain kind of Instagram graphic. And it's this type of graphic that was really popular. And I feel like it's sort of faded from popularity now, but in kind of 2019, 2020, maybe like 2017 to 2020, it was really popular. It was a really popular way to post. And so I'm talking about these kinds of graphics that have text often in the center. Text is kind of the central thing. And then the graphics are shown with this very feminine color palette. I started looking at these and collecting them on an Instagram account that I started so I could train the algorithm to only show me this type of content. So I wanted to start off by just scrolling through some of the posts that I saved that this was the inspiration for Fake It Till You Make It. So my process really began with creating this Instagram account, and just every account I could find that posted this type of content, I would follow from the account, and I would save all of these graphics, and really try to understand how aesthetically these broke down to different components, and also, of course, the language, and the structure behind the way that these phrases were built. Um, and so I started saving all of these. And when I was thinking about programming the system for the language algorithm for Fake It Till You Make It, I knew that I wanted to have enough fine control so the project's output would walk the line between sounding like something you would see on here, like kind of normal, all the way to sounding totally absurd and weird. And the system I found that worked the best for that was a sort of, I call it like a Mad Libs algorithm. It's really basic, just taking sentence structures. So, for example, like this one, life is tough, but so are you. Um, I would put tough in my list of adjectives in the code, and then have life is adjective, but so are you. Um, and I'll show that in a second. But yeah, you can see that these all kind of share this very feminine color palette. And I was just so fascinated with the range of what these phrases were talking about. Believe in yourself, kindness is contagious, you look beautiful today, make it happen, babe, shock everyone. So this is kind of all what, I mean, I saved hundreds of these. So this is what I was working with as reference material, as I was going through the project. And then the way that I started programming, I'm actually going to put this up. I use VS Code. The way that I started building out the language system was by collecting. I would have my VS Code tab open, and then I would have also this Instagram saved post open on my computer. So I would have it like side by side. And then I would take phrases that I saw on here and put them into this large array of sentence structures. So you can see here, for For example, I left a comment on what was always the original phrase that I was pulling from. So you can see here I have setbacks are part of the process. Heartbreak is part of the process. Everyone's path is different. I'm abundantly blessed. And then what I would do was select the element that I thought would be best to replace with a different word. So here I chose setbacks. And then so here I have NP, which is nouns plural, saying that this could be replaced with any plural noun and then are part of the process no matter what would always be the same. So this is basically happening at scale. There's around 250 sentence structures in here. And some of them have multiple places where they're replaced, not just one. So for example, this one, what a beautiful day to not text your ex. This becomes what a adjective day to not verb your nouns singular. And so this will make more sense when I go over to the library. So here is where I kept track of all of the words that I was adding from the saved post that I had on Instagram. So some of them are times. So like sometimes daily for a minute now and then. Verbs, obsess, scroll, donate, cry, protect, rest, enchant. There are hundreds of each of these. And I separated them out based on the type of word it was too. So these are verbs. These are like past tense verbs. These are verbs that end in ing. These are verbs that end in s. Adverbs, nouns singular, nouns plural. I also ended up having to separate adjectives and then adjectives that started with a vowel, because those would use if it was a sentence that had like a blank, it would sound weird if it wasn't an blank in English. So I had that. Also, like I would have big, bigger, and biggest to have the varying types of adjectives. So that is how that is working. And these are really short, weird phrases because, for example, like adjective, I used to have it all written out as the full word. The variable was called adjective when I was programming. But then when it came to Mint, because I had adjectives so many times in the sentence structures, it was just making my file so much larger than it needed to be because it was a string. And so I ended up just shortening the variable names, which was kind of like the easiest thing for me to do to shrink the file. And then also here, I would also port over instructions that I found here. So if I found a graphic here that had a specific instruction, like smell flowers, buy art, I would add that. And that is what became the larger instruction blocks in Fake It Till You Make It. And so all of the language stuff is living. Basically, all of the library of language and the sentence structures are living here. And it took me a really long time to hand type out all of these because there's no easy way to copy and paste from Instagram like this. But the larger I made the data set, it just became more and more interesting to watch what would come out over a longer period of time. So let's get into the code. Let's start here. So when I started programming Fake It Till You Make It, I really saw a lot of graphics that were, background, text in the center, really large type. You can see lots of these look like that. And so that's aesthetically what I focused on as the original output. And I want to show a piece of my process here. So another piece of software that was really important to me while I was working on the project was Figma. And so you can see here, I'm kind of embarrassed to show it, but this is a really, really old version of the algorithmic output as I was testing early days of Fake It Till You Make It. And you can see the colors are really different. I was really only testing with lots of different backgrounds, but all of the type is just in the center, and there's not a lot of variation. So initially that was what I was working with, and it wasn't until over time I started adding more variation with the backgrounds to eventually get to having the higher number of backgrounds that I have. So what's happening here in the code is I'm using the random class that's in the art blocks documentation. And the first thing that I'm doing is the first thing that the program is deciding is what kind of background type is this specific mint going to have. So I played around a lot with balancing the probability of all of the different background types. And you can see this when there's so many grid tests that I have, but when I get closer to here, I was really focusing on what balance between having a lot of this centered text is really the kind of the usual output for fake it till you make it. But I also wanted to sprinkle in having these other different types, but it not feel too balanced in one way or the other. And so I was playing around a lot with the probability, and I landed on 70% was that it was going to be that center text. And then otherwise, it's either a special kind of text or a split text, which is what this is called on the top and bottom. And so right here, it's this on BTI stands for background type index. It's making that decision. And then it's also making a decision of whether to add these stickers, which are the sparkles that are variable in the program. So that's the first thing the program's deciding. And then also there's a 10% chance of the text being italicized. So that's also decided right at the beginning. And yeah, then this is making sure that it's not italicized if it's a special kind of text. And then there's there's heavy sparkles and light sparkles. And so here I'm deciding all of that. And then what I want to talk about here, so here in the switch case, there's the background type index, and I'm deciding, okay, based on the background, I'm going to assign, this is the color palette choice, based on whatever background that this is. And so when I go to here, here's where all the color palettes are. So let's open this up. So I have them all, I have all the indices numbered because I was doing a lot of testing with the colors and trying to really make the color palettes feel cohesive when I was doing tests where I was zooming in, looking at each mint individually, and then zooming out, looking at it as a collection. And I struggled a lot initially. If you see like I showed at the beginning, this color palette is really different. And the initial steps that I would go through to do this were I was looking at all of these. I was picking out ones that I liked. And then I was just kind of like doing the eyedrop type of tool on different graphics that I actually found on Instagram. And then I was combining them to create these different color palettes that were often really randomized, essentially with the background and the text color. And I just found looking at this and seeing it in these different iterations, I just felt like the color palette did not feel cohesive and didn't look like, it looked like almost like my saved collection of all the Instagram imagery, but it didn't look cohesive enough to feel like it was coming from a single account, which is what I really wanted the collection to feel like. And so I don't have an explicit design background. So I started watching a lot of videos on color theory and really trying to think about how I could create a color palette that felt true to the references that I was looking at, but felt more cohesive. So you can see here. This was me watching YouTube videos on color theory, trying to understand how to start with a hue that felt aligned with my vision for what I wanted the project to feel like, and then work with adjustments based on that to create color palettes that felt like they were really working. So in Figma was really where I was playing around with the colors, checking. Also, in an earlier version I was only I was randomizing the text color and then the background, but something that came up a lot with this was using text in the output. It's not very forgiving aesthetically because it's very obvious when the text is illegible because of the color combination. The sizing looks off because it's cropped or something weirdly. So I ended up creating really specific set color palettes for each type of background. And so they're all stored here, and I have them numbered because sometimes, like for example, for the solid color palettes, there's 27 of them. But I used to have more, and then I would go through and test over and over. And every time I saw one I didn't like, I would go one by one, increasing the index in the color palette choice. And then every time I saw one that I didn't like, I would remove it until I felt like it had a really cohesive set. So yeah, so I was checking in here all of the different color palettes. Then I'm setting the background color and the text color. And then I was playing around with having a shadow on some of the text, which mostly shows up with some of the special cases. And then also you can see the solid color palettes are different from the gradients. And so here in the gradients, I have an array of all of the colors as well as the text color listed for what those look like. And that is separate from the checkers colored palette. So let me pull up on art blocks. So you can see here, the checkers is what I call FITYMI pixels as the naming, but these are all their own custom color palettes that are listed here. And then same with the hearts. So what's happening is it's choosing all of those. And then in the occasion that it's a special kind of text, which basically means one of those non-centered text types, I'm going in here and choosing which type of special text there is. So the wavy one word is the wavy baby. So you can see here, that's this set of words. And I'm picking from nouns, adjectives, verbs, and mixing those together to choose a word that works. It has to be a really specific length because I have the sizing pretty consistent for that type of output. And then what's happening is it's just concatenating all of that into to layer it 7 times. And then that's different from the mood swing, which is this one, and these all have motion. And then that one also, it's creating a new string, and then just checking to make sure that it's not too large. And then, layering that multiple times to create the string that will go in there. And so it took a lot of kind of trial and error to make sure that no matter what, I could trust that the output would work with this format, because I never wanted it to generate something that looked weird if it's too short of a phrase. And it also obviously looks weird if it's too long of a phrase. So there are a lot of checks built in to make sure that no matter what, I could rely on it looking okay. And then here, the candy hearts is what the name that I have for the snack tray. So I'll show that here. And I kind of thought of these like the little candy hearts that you get that have a word on them. And so I programmed a specific class here to add in the candy hearts, and there are 2 different kinds. There are affirmations and then there are invitations. So if I go to the library here, you can see at the bottom, affirmations instructions are like today's affirmations, remember, affirmations for the day, important reminders, gentle reminders, that kind of thing. And then invitations are phrases like take what you need, holding space for. So affirmations, if it starts with an affirmation, it always has this I am format. And then the invitations are validation looks like never feel guilty about. So it's not so clear because aesthetically the layout looks really similar, but there is that distinction happening in the program when it's deciding which kind to focus on, and that is a 50% chance. And then the instructions block is the TMI text, which is taking all from the instructions that I've collected from actual graphics. Those are, here. And it's combining those in a random way. And something that I thought was really interesting was the decision to actually just have it totally randomly generate. And obviously on an actual graphic, you would never see something repeated multiple times, like visualize your outcome, research skincare, visualize your outcome. But I really liked that the repetition of some of the instructions in the TMI text added to this feeling that it was computer generated. It added to that feeling of absurdity. And I'm really glad that I ended up, this is not an idea that I started with making the collection, but I'm really glad that I ended up with this because I think it really speaks to a lot of the feelings I have around these kinds of graphics, that they're just telling you so many different ways to live your life that it becomes like you're just overdosing on self-help advice. And it becomes really overwhelming to see so many suggestions about things that you should do at once, because it's impossible for someone to actually really do all of these things together. So that's where the instructions are happening. And then, okay, so really, those are all some of the special cases, but really what is, for the most part, creating the majority of the output, if we just look at the basic ones, is where it's putting together a string. So there's a function here called createnewstring, and then I'm splitting it into individual words. And then there's a lot happening where I'm checking to find the longest word in the generated string. And I'm also looking at the number of words that are total in the phrase that's selected, because I kept running into these cases where if, the text was too big and then one word was too long, it just looked really off. If the words were running too close to the sides, or of course, if the words were running off the top and bottom. And so I wanted to be able to have some of these longer phrases, like disguise yourself the way you welcome others, while still balancing having shorter phrases too, and then adjusting the text size based on that. So I'm doing all of these checks here. And this is basically adjusting the text size. I have an array of different text size choices. This is adjusting the text size. And it's also adjusting if there are stickers, which are the sparkles on the words. So I'm going to just show here. So sparkles are rare, but it's also adjusting if the sparkles are on. And if there were too many words, I felt like the sparkles visually just weren't working. It worked better with having a shorter phrase. And so that's what's happening there. And then down here are all of my helper functions that I wrote to do things like set the gradient colors, draw a character, set gradients here, and then all of the shapes that come up. So we go to the symbols. There's a few recurring symbols that happen. So you can see there's the flower, the heart, and the this star. So I use those in both the snack tray versions, and then also this one's called main character energy, the type. And these were symbols that I just found over and over when I was looking through all of the graphics that I was saving. There are just always these flowers, these stars, and I really wanted to represent that in the collection. And so here's where I'm drawing the star shape. And then the sparkles, which we were just talking about, those are being drawn here with a set of curved vertices. And then I want to talk about also, I'll mention here, there are actually multiple different heart shapes. So you can see this heart shape is a bit more pointy at the bottom. And then let me find another one. This is actually a different heart shape, even though I think this one worked a lot better with this layout. So I have different heart shapes happening there. And then another thing I want to mention that I think is fun, I actually, if we only look at these, so I built in another generative aspect with the faces. It's just super tiny, but I have it randomized as to whether it's just the smiley face or it's winking on the right side or the left side, like you see here. So that was something that I wanted to add that was not explicitly listed in the feature set, but was another thing I wanted to have in there as a kind of wink. And so that's what's happening here, the flowers. And then let's look at create new string here. This is where where we saw earlier, where there's that list of sentence structures. This is where I'm actually replacing, for example, if it said NP or NS, noun singular, noun plural, this is where I am randomly choosing here a random choice from the library array of all of these, and then that is being added to the sentence structure. So W just stands for word. So basically I'm selecting the word that's going to be replaced, and that's happening here for all of these. And then this new string that I'm creating, every time that's happening, I'm adding that word to it. So there's also some little things like, for example, sometimes I would have, I didn't want to add a space in between things. So for example, if there was a word and then a comma, it would look weird if there was like a space between the comma. So I'm double checking here to make sure that if the specific, if the phrase that I'm adding has a comma in it, to make sure to not add a space for that. So there are little checks like that that happened a lot as I was working on the project that you just have to watch out for, because it's so obvious when it looks wrong when you're working with a text. And so otherwise, as long as I should add a space, I'm adding a space. I ended up going with having everything all uppercase. And so I was just making sure that everything was uppercase here. And then I'm also adding, there's a chance of there being punctuation, which is also added here. And then it returns the phrase that is used in the output. And so this is really where all of the setup happened before the actual creation of the image. The more aesthetic work was happening here in my sketch file. I also initially was for a while working on this as one huge file. And I really started separating it out once, because on the art block site, you can only upload, there's a maximum to each file that you're adding in. I separated it out really once I got to the process where I was uploading the files onto art blocks. Okay, so I want to talk about next. Some people have noticed this, but I think not everybody maybe. But if there's one thing to know about any project that I make that's web-based, I'm always putting things in the console. And we had a conversation about this as I was uploading the code onto the blockchain, was because, you know, I'm linking to some YouTube videos that to me are important references for understanding the framework of the project. I'm linking to those, which, you know, that might someday not be there anymore, but it doesn't affect the actual functionality of the code. So I still do have those in here. And then the other detail I have is a generated note. So if I go here, this is the secret underground version of your fake it till you make it mint. There's a small note that's actually generated. So if I, for example, click on this. So this one says, my leaders don't speak me. And then in the console, you see this one has generated as the note underneath, hey, you are meaningful. And so these always start with, so I call this an interjection. So some kind of, if we look at the library, wait, int, okay. These. So these often I will sometimes show up in the program as the starter of the phrase. So like baby girl, comma, babe, comma, actually, comma. So that's what's happening here. And that also shows up in the actual Mint outputs. And then you are blank. And so I wanted to have this other layer happening because I just loved how flexible this system became once I had this library of structures there. So that's what's happening there. And then a note to talk about the typeface. I really went back and forth for a long time about whether I should create my own custom typeface for the project, which of course could not be loaded in a font file because that would just be massive and really heavy for the program to live on chain on art blocks. And so I was debating about whether I wanted to actually create a system to draw every single letter or if I should work with some of the default fonts. And I tested a lot of the different typefaces. And ultimately, I felt like I really liked working with a basic sans serif. And later in the code, I'm actually just adding a bit of a thicker stroke around it to soften the edges a little bit. And I decided that I actually really liked working with this as a default and focusing primarily on the language and the outputs because a lot of times this output has this sort of like hand-drawn font to it, or it has sometimes this really default like Canva looking font. And I liked the idea that this was computer generated. I'm using the default font in the browser. People are using whatever defaults they have access to make these. And so I ended up deciding to just work with the default font, also because I just felt like that was not where I wanted to spend my energy. And I felt like once it was all uppercase, it was looking the way that I wanted it to. So here's where after it picks the type, it's actually drawing on the background. For example, the mesh gradients have animated particles. That's actually like it gives it this subtle glowy movement, which I think is really nice. Oh my gosh. Oops. So yeah. Zoom out here. So here the glowy goddess. Can see that this has this. It's very subtle, but those do have motion on them. So I'm animating the particles really slowly in the background. And these are just setting up all of the gradients. And same with the heart rings that are animated. Those are probably the most rare. I'm setting up those, which lives as a growing heart class. And it's also interesting to note, like some of the backgrounds that were more complicated, like just more detailed than a solid gradient, like the hypnotic heartthrob. It was really difficult to read the text if I didn't add this shadow behind it. So that's why some of these have an added shadow behind because it just makes the text much more legible. And then here's where if it is a special kind of text, I'm looking at what special text index is, which basically means like which kind. Is it a wavy baby? Is it a mood swing? And I'm drawing the characters one by one actually onto the canvas. So I'm not just doing a default like text with line breaks in it. to have the full amount of control that I wanted, I realized that I needed to be iterating over the text and drawing each character one by one, which was challenging because it's not it when you're working with the type, it doesn't make sense to have just an equal space between letters. It really depends on the size of the letter. And so I'm actually measuring with every single letter, I'm actually measuring the width of the letter and then placing it onto the canvas based on that. And that gave me the most fine control over the placement of the text, which also became especially relevant. I'm going to jump here down a little bit. It became especially relevant when I was doing something like adding sparkles. So the sparkles were really they look deceivingly simple, but they were challenging because, um, for example, if I just always had the sparkles in this location, it would look really weird if I had a different phrase here and the sparkles were placed in this way. So for a while, I tried randomizing the placement, and it just always there was moments that it looked really off. And so I decided to actually calculate based on the letter size and placement, all of the sparkles are actually responding to where those letters are. So again, that's why I wanted to be able to go in and the program's not just pasting the text in one text block, it's individually aware of where each letter is on the output, because that way I'm able to align. You can see here, like this one has 1, 2, 3, 4 placements of the sparkles. So I'm here able to check where each letter is. So I'm looking at this one, I'm looking, okay, this is the first line and the first letter. So I'm looking at the first line, the first letter, then I'm moving from this specific placement over here, and then drawing a sparkle enough outside of it that I think it'll give the effect that looks like it's framing the text in a really nice way. And so here I'm drawing those there. And then that's also happening. Then I'm saying, okay, I'm jumping down to the second line here, and then that one I want to move to the end, which is why I'm saying, okay, if it's the second line, and then jumping down to the end of that output, then I'm drawing those sparkles based on that position here. And so I didn't, at first I thought, oh, maybe I could get away with just placing the text on using a more basic function, but I realized that I really wanted to give the illusion, because when you think of all of these graphics, like someone hand placed each of these stars in a way that they felt like worked well with the text that they were working with in the center, and to create a program that was able to mimic that sort of aesthetic sensibility, I needed it to have an awareness of each of the letters' locations. And so this was an element that was definitely more challenging for me, was thinking about how to design a program that had a design mindset like that in mind in response to type on screen. So all of that sparkle stuff is happening there. And then another thing that I will mention is so there's some output also where I wanted to have a split between the top and the bottom. And so that was something that I also had to programmatically decide where the text was going to be split, and then where it would be laid out on the page. So I'm also here I'm splitting the lines and then iterating over each character and drawing it, and then making sure that neither line is too long, because I didn't want it to run into the character that's in the center. And I also wanted to make sure neither one ran off screen, and each one felt balanced. So they're just all these small typography details that once once it looks right, it looks obviously right, but just looks so egregiously wrong when it was looking wrong. And so there was a lot of fine tuning and checks I had to put in here to make sure that all of the text, no matter what word was generated, would not look like it was totally poorly designed. Um, and so I'm just gonna scroll down here. And then here's where I would have a way to download it when I was testing, and I was going into the Figma files, and I'll just show some of the tests here. I really liked using Figma because, yeah, here's some early ones. You can see I was playing around with lowercase, different. This is before when I was trying to randomize some things. It just looks horrible. But what I would do when I was testing a collection is I would, this is again early, when I was testing a collection is I would pull in all of these, and then it was really nice because I could just drop in like 100 of them and then view them in Figma in a way I could kind of easily zoom in and out to just test the variation on each one and the feeling of it as a collection. And so when I was picking the color palettes, I guess I'll look at here. I also wanted to balance. I wanted to have elements of blue and green, but I wanted the collection to feel mostly pink and these very like feminine colors, because I felt like when I was collecting these, that's kind of how I felt that's what I felt like was the most prominent color in the reference material that I was collecting. So a lot of the grid testing happened to focus on what colors looked like that as well. And there was also this intuitive moment where I'd have sometimes, like, for example, I don't think this color palette is in there anymore, because that combination to me, even though I initially, programmed in more color palettes, and then I just would look at it and felt something was off. So there's also a process of elimination when I was going through the color palettes by the end to arrive on something that I felt was really cohesive. I also want to talk about, once I had finished uploading everything onto all the code onto art blocks, I also had a lot of fun naming the color palettes. And I decided to give them names that was mostly inspired by the way that nail polish colors are named, or like lipstick shades, eyeshadow shades. So things from the beauty industry, often they have these sort of like cutesy feminine names for the different colors that you can buy of a product. And so I wanted the naming of the colorways that I had chosen to reflect that. So they all have this sort of like very sweet tone to them. This one, Addison, is inspired by Addison Rae. I have her doll here. She's like a TikTok star. You can see it's kind of like that color palette. And then down here, there's Gaslight, Gatekeep, Girl Boss, Smoothie, Deja Vu, where I was thinking about Olivia Rodrigo's, both Deja Vu and Sour. I was thinking about Olivia Rodrigo's like imagery associated with her album. Skater Boy, Avril Lavigne. We Heart It is a website that's actually for like, it's kind of like Pinterest. There's a lot of very like aesthetic imagery on this website. And so I thought about that when I was thinking about this. Video games, I was thinking about Lana Del Rey. So I had a lot of fun putting together the names of all the color palettes here. And same with the names of the different backgrounds. I wanted them to feel cute and really related to visually what the layouts felt like snack tray, TMI text. Main character energy is like the trend on TikTok where people were like, you have to have you have to romanticize your life. You have to have main character energy to like make yourself the protagonist in your own reality, but on social media. So that's where that one comes from. Yeah, so I spent a lot of time coming up with names that I felt like weren't just naming the color palette, but also added to the overall feeling that I wanted with the collection. And then another thing I'll talk about is it was important to me to build a website that reflected the framing that contextualized the project really nicely. And so I built this is fake it till you make it.lol. I built this website to look like an Instagram profile because the collection is explicitly referencing Instagram. And then on the website, I built in this. This is actually generating live output from the code. And I built this because I wanted people to immediately be able to visit the website and get a sense that it could generate anything in real time. And get a sense that it was infinite, which is one of the really special parts to me about this project. And so I wanted it to be this like single scroll, almost Instagram like feeling. And then I think I've mentioned this before, but I have been also posting on Instagram output from the project because it was important for me that they're coming in order. And so this is 206. I post them in the order of the output. It was important to me that these not only lived on art blocks, but also at the same time lived kind of back where in the home that they were, in the environment that they were originally inspired by, and were able to operate in that context in the way that I saw that the other graphics that inspired the project were operating. Yeah, and so I save these by going to the Art Blocks website, like getting the image, then on my phone, I'll save it to my phone, and then I'll post it. And I often will, let me find, like this one has it. I caption it something I'm thinking about, or you can add a song to it. I had a song of what I'm thinking about. And it's been a really fun way to share the project with an audience that's outside of Art Blocks. Yeah, I think I'm gonna stop there, going through most of the code. Yeah, so I had it as these files, then I minified it when I put it on Art Blocks. Yeah, and it's been so amazing, this project, to see it live not only on Art Blocks and I post it on Instagram, but also especially in Block Talk. On Art Blocks Discord server, seeing people like hashtag pull up certain mints in conversation, and there's become this sort of like lore around the project where people are using the element of chance to it like as part of the conversation that's happening in the chat. So someone will say something, someone will randomly pull up a fake it till you make it. And I just, it's an aspect of the project that I didn't expect to play such a huge role. I wasn't thinking about that while I was making it, but it's become really one of the most special and meaningful parts of the project because people are actually using the language in real conversations. Yeah. And so I'm glad I have the chance to talk a little bit more about my process because I think this project especially the output looks really simple because I'm not, because I mean, it's intended to look that way, but there were a lot of details that took me a long time to get right. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That was incredible. I think people are going to really enjoy watching this and learning more, depth into the project. On the last topic that you mentioned, that's actually one of the questions that that came from Block Talk. It's from
Oh, cool.
UMFA. And so he mentions many times when people are chatting in Block Talk, someone pops up, like the hashtag or the pound question mark to randomly call an output. And it somehow very often fits the conversation. Why do you think that is?
I love this question. Because something I also want to talk about is that I started making this project feeling, when I was looking at all of this output, I started it feeling somewhat cynical about it, where I felt like, oh, how am I supposed to find meaning in this, piece of Instagram content that's just meant to get likes and comments and shares um, but truly, the longer, I mean, I have looked at, as I was developing the project, I have looked at thousands of output generated from the fake it till you make it system. And truly, often it'll output something that I find to be truly meaningful um, to me in my own life. And it's a computer generated thing. Like the computer is not, and same with it in Block Talk, like the computer it doesn't know the context of the conversation, and it doesn't know like what will make the most sense. But what's been amazing is it's really about not the computer generated aspect, but the meaning comes from the mind that is receiving it. And so often when I see someone pull something up in Block Talk that just, I mean, there have been moments that are like insanely perfect in Block Talk that I don't know why that happens, but a lot of times it's often that I think we as people are able to kind of see a phrase and then in our own minds like draw all these connections to our life and the current conversation and find a way for it to fit in to whatever's happening around us that does make sense. And so and what I love also is that's like because the output often sounds kind of absurd. It's often like not this phrase that you would ever expect someone to write out and send themselves, but it'll say something like slightly off that you're in your mind as like an intelligent person can kind of turn over and make relevant to whatever's happening in the current conversation. So I think that's just been really beautiful, and I think it adds this truly dynamic element to the Block Talk conversation where it's responding to the conversation and what's happening and what people are sharing and talking about, and it's adding its own sort of like weird perspective to the conversation. But I think a lot
Definitely.
of it is because we're like we want to find meaning. We like to find meaning in the world around us. It gives us purpose in life, and so I think that's a big part of what happens in Block Talk.
Yeah, I mean it's used in so many different ways too. It can I don't know. People use it to like answer questions. People use it to break up tension. I feel like that's a really big one. Um,
Mhm.
it interjects into the conversation in that way. Um,
Totally. Comic relief, yeah.
for
Also,
sure, for sure.
yeah.
In creating the data set of both the
Mhm.
words and phrases to include, how did you know when to stop? And I guess I'm wondering if it became increasingly hard to find unique words at a certain point.
Hmm, that's a great question. I felt like I could have made it 10 times larger even. It was really hard to stop because you would think like, "Oh, all of this kind of sounds the same." Like, where you like, did the same words just keep appearing over and over? But I kept finding every time I sat down to work on it, I kept finding new words that were just perfect for the program, which made it really hard to stop because I was always like, "Oh, what if I find more? What if I find more?" But I had to cap it at some point because, especially with these kind of like long form generative projects, you can work on them forever. And so
Right, right.
I had to eventually decide. It was hard for me also because I wanted it to feel like there was a high level of variation, so no phrases were repeating or felt like too similar at all. And having like me look at it so many times, I started to I often felt like, oh, I'm seeing the same thing. But realistically, when I thought about it, I'm like, I'm looking at like multiple thousands of them as I'm working on it. And realistically, there's only going to be a smaller edition set. So once I reached 250 sentence structures, um, and had like over 100 like nouns and adjectives and verbs, I felt like the mixture of all of those things gave a really satisfying level of variation. And 250 to me was a nice kind of clean number to stop at, because I felt like, if each one of those is only happening like 3 times ish in the set, in the collection, then it's not going to feel too repetitive. Yeah, but it stopped because I kept finding new stuff.
Cool. It's kind of I guess, a running joke in the art blocks world when people learn that an image that appears static is actually animated. And
Hmm.
so I think, it's hard to say the time frame, but weekly, monthly basis, some people are like, "Oh wow, fake it till you make it moves."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
totally.
yeah, and so you briefly touched upon motion, but I just wanted to kind of hear more about your decision to not have all the outputs static. Like, I guess, what was like the impetus to have some animated?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so when this imagery is circulated on Instagram, it's almost always a static image. So that made the most sense for the kind of default way for the project to exist for me. But I come from a programming background, and my favorite way to make work is to make things that live in the browser. And I think it's so special that this project is running live code. The performance of live code is really important to me whenever I'm showing work. And so I wanted to add in a way that was, it's not crazy motion, but a way to build on top of that, and allow the motion to be like a special cherry on top for some of the specific types of output, that just added like a little shine, or just like a little, almost like Easter egg to some of the mints. And so I wanted to have an element of the project that was making use of the fact that Artblocks is running live code on chain, and it's not just imagery, because in my practice that has been so important. And so I really thought about motion wise what would feel nice. And for example, like these mood swings, or like wavy baby ones, I would see um, I would see this kind of imagery on actual graphics, like just the still image. So sometimes it was me looking at a still image and then reverse engineering what I thought, if it was animated, what that animation would look like. And so that's what happened with, for example, this one. And same with some of the gradients, like some of the mesh gradients that have motion. Like these, like that type of image I would have seen on the references that I saved, but I was just doing the exercise of imagining what it would be like to have some special motion associated with it. Yeah.
Cool. No, and they definitely are. They are definitely are like kind of like a cherry on top for some of the outputs too. And I think it's nice that none of them are like truly like overwhelming too. A lot of the animation is like quite subtle. And it's not jarring. I feel like you could be scrolling through and see most of them being static, and then be surprised by an
Mhm.
animated piece.
Yeah.
We're coming up on an hour, and I know this may be a tough question to do on the spot, but this came up a couple of times. So I'll start it with mint zero doesn't count, but if you had to choose a favorite output, or maybe top three, or a couple that really stuck out to you, what would they be?
Mm.
And if it's easier to, if there's some like from test outputs that you can think of, you can include those. But folks are wondering.
Hmm. Well, I'll actually, this might be, I have a collection. I think I have shown this a little bit before, but I have a collection of. It was hard for me to narrow it down, so this is like 150 or something of my favorite ones. But some of my favorites from my collection of favorites are. I like Current Mood, Crying Through Business. Um,
Nice.
I like um, Don't Feel Bad for Praying is one I really like, because it speaks to my mindset around the project. This is one of my all-time faves. Psycho Girls Are Near. that one as well. Um, and actually, life is fearless, and I do have moments. That one I always think about too. And scare the people that follow you. That one also. um, yeah, I think though it's okay to learn. I like too. Those are a few that really like when I am showing the project. Those are a few that always come to mind that stand out to me as ones I like. This is on the spot, so my
No,
collection of
totally. I
all
know it's a
my projects are
high
here.
pressure question. Yeah.
So,
Uh,
yeah.
And then I guess I'm gonna sneak one more in. So that Instagram page that you created that are showing the outputs, have you found that any of, uh, say, the followers of that are the followers of the pages that you were using for inspiration? Like, do people, engage in that
Definitely.
way?
Definitely. It's funny because as this account that I have that let me up um as this account that I have, like every account that I follow for the most part is like an account that posts this kind of stuff. And I made a conscious decision. I mean, I have the website linked here where it talks about it being a generative project, but I don't say on the Instagram, this is a generative project that's made with code, that kind of thing, because I wanted it to operate in the Instagram world in a way that felt similar to other accounts because I like the idea that people can find it and not and kind of have to do the mental work themselves to be like,
Yeah.
wait, like that sounds kind of weird. Did someone write that? So I often do find I have had people follow me and then comment things like, "Oh, you're so funny," like, or like not like clearly like don't or like aren't familiar with the art blocks context that the project lives in.
Right.
And that's a huge part of the project. And I like that it can expand beyond the art blocks audience by living on Instagram too.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is awesome. Um, that's it for questions. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else you wanted to close with before we head out?
Um, no, I think that's it. It's been really meaningful to share all of the details of the project. And I've loved watching other episodes and seeing, I think, kind of being on an artist's screen and seeing all of the little tools and strategies they use to bring their collection to life is really cool. So I'm happy to, yeah, I'm happy I got to do it.
Awesome. No, we're happy to have you. I want to say thanks to everyone who asked questions today. Umathe, Raytron, Pyramus, I think some others, and say thanks to those who will be watching in the future. And finally, very special thanks to Maya for speaking on her project, Fake It Till You Make It. Till next time, be great and happy minting.
Thank you.